Hello, Facebook friends, Marianne here. I want to take a moment to share with you something exciting that is happening at 11 a.m. Central Time today. And that is the releasing of Juntas Es Mejor, a wonderful book focused on the resilience of women from around the world. In particular, it was looking at the lives of Hispanic women and how they were experiencing going through challenges and how they overcame them at different times in their lives, from childhood on through adulthood. And not focusing so much on when we had wins, but when we had losses. What did we actually get from those times? What kind of wisdom, what kind of strengths did we perhaps not know we had going into those challenges, and that we emerged even having more of as a result? So I also want to give a huge shout out to Veronica Sosa, who is the CEO, of She Magazine, and is doing wonderful work up in Amsterdam, Brussels, Belgium, and in Spain with her magazine, and gathering women leaders from around the world, and who's had a passion to pull this together, because she said right now, doing all sorts of social unrest added to the pandemic, this is the time that people really need to have inspiration. And we get inspiration from sharing our challenges with each other, because when you understand that somebody else has been through something as challenging or similar to you, or perhaps they have a totally different life than you had, a totally different full field of experiences, but the emotions they had are something you can relate to, and we hear those stories, we can pull inside ourselves and reflect on our own selves and say, how can we gain strength from some of those challenges? Because the things that we learn the most from in life are quite often not our wins, they're our losses, they're the stressful moments, but those are the things that give us an opportunity to gain in strength and wisdom, resilience, and even just outward intelligence of processing what comes our way. So anyway, I want to give a huge shout out to Veronica Sosa for the invitation, to Viola De Glanville, who invited me and brought me to her attention, and to all the other outstanding women. I really did not want to hold up the process, because unlike me, they're all completely fluent in Spanish, whereas I had to have a translator for my contribution for the book. But today, what I'm going to offer to those of you is a reading, and eventually it will be underneath through the process that YouTube offers of having things in Spanish. So what I'll be doing is I'll upload it on Facebook and in other places, and then I will put the link down there once YouTube has actually translated into Spanish as well. And then of course you can get the book and read it in Spanish, as well as so many other amazing women. And I cannot stress enough what a privilege it has been to get to contribute to something alongside these women who absolutely inspire me. So without further ado, I'm going to move into giving a reading, which I've never done something like this. I've contributed to a lot of books before, but never done a reading. So you'll just see the flash up of the book, a link if you want to buy the book, and also a link to today's event, because if you happen to be able to speak Spanish or you're bilingual, then it's an excellent opportunity for you to hear from so many other female leaders, and hopefully they will inspire you as they have certainly inspired me. So without further ado, here's the reading for Juntas Es Mejor, focusing on the resilience of women. So this is my personal journey, and I hope that it provides you all with some kind of inspiration, because I know so many of us are going through hard times right now, from the loss of dear friends, from the uncertainty that the pandemic has caused, and trying to find out how we can consciously become part of the solution in society by pulling upon our own experiences. It is truly an exciting opportunity that we are each faced with. So let's grab onto that and use our challenges so that they can become our strengths, not just for ourselves, but from all that we serve beside. So thank you for all that you are, for taking interest. And without further ado, Juntas Es Mejor. Reading the contribution by Marian Thompson-Frenk to Juntas Es Mejor, a book on the resiliency of women. I was terrified of being left inside this prison called Timberlawn, where the floor I was on was locked at all times, and terrified of my mother, who struggled with bipolar, led her to laugh at me during a visit when I told her, "You know you should be the one in here." To which she met my gaze with a smile, answering, "Yes, but I'm the adult. They will always believe what I say." I rubbed my arms, my 13-year-old hands, kneading the memory of the pain left by her nails countless times before. My heart racing in fear, knowing it took very little for her to grab me and hit my head again and again against the wall, or to throw the school books at my head. To all the world, she looked like the ideal mother, coming to school with candy bars for my peers, waving and smiling with her movie star perfect teeth and gorgeous long hair, as she offered Snickers bars and cookies out the window seconds after spending the morning telling me, "You make me sick. You make me sick. You're stupid. Are you listening to me? I know you hear me, Marianne. I know you hear every word. Listen now. You're stupid. You can't get through this school without me. You can't do anything without me. You make me sick. You make me sick. You make me sick. Oh, look, there's Anne. Now, she's someone you should try to be more like. Oh, Anne, come over here. I've got some candy for you." To which I'd inevitably be fighting back the tears and hiding the scratches of bruises left from her nails as I walked to class. It had been like that since around second grade, when Mom's bipolar changed the vivacious, brilliant, fun, wonderful woman my father and I both knew into someone entirely different. But at 13, I didn't understand that it was the bipolar and not just my mom being mean to me. And like any preteen, I wondered if she was right. Never mind that my hearing loss forced me to struggle through school, that my teachers believed I was a child protege with the visual and literary arts. I'd hear my mom telling people, "She doesn't need to know that." And when they spoke of where I excelled, in the next breath would grab me and say, "You're stupid, you make me sick." It had gotten so out of hand that I tried to find some way to feel control over the uncontrollable. I was quite accustomed to the uncontrollable, having battled seizures, migraines that would last up to 5 days of throwing up and in pain in the dark, asthma that hospitalized me, and more. And with every medical treatment I received, I knew for a fact that my adoption into a wealthy Texas family had undoubtedly saved my life, for I would have never received so many life-saving treatments if I'd been struggling to sell my wares in the Cuernavaca, Mexico markets. One walk through there let me know that what my USA teachers marveled at were commonly shared towns down there, and that provided a grounding perspective, while the tall pyramids let me know I held the potential of my genetic ancestors inside me. At the same time, my father encouraged me, letting me know that the hard worker would always go further at the end of the day, and the person who just tried to glide on by would town alone. He shared stories of his family fighting for desegregation in the South and helped me to understand that pain does not define us, but our reactions to the pain is where we find control. So that night in Timberlawn, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, wondering what to do about the craziness that had become my life. Was I safe there? Or was I safer with my mom's unpredictability? I knew I was put there because the doctors had said I was suicidal, but they didn't get it. My 13-year-old mind went over and over what had happened. I sat in the kitchen thinking over how the controlled meditation my father had taught me reduced the pain of the migraine, reduced the likelihood of having to go to the hospital for asthma, and lowered the chances seizures would take over. So thinking I needed to feel some of that control over my life, I snuck down to the kitchen and pulled out a kitchen knife, slowly cutting my arm in small little slices, thinking with each stroke that I was making the conscious decision to stay alive and not end it. And if I was in control of my existence, then it didn't matter what my mother did to me, and she could only hurt me if I had made the choice to live. That warped logic was what my poor father had walked into, and before the next night came, I put into Timberlawn, where they'd locked my sketch pad and pens and paints because they wanted me to talk with them about my feelings instead of writing or drawing them out. I was leaning against the pillows thinking on this when a shadow filled the doorway, and a nurse told me to get dressed and go see the doctor. I thought it was strange to be seeing the doctor at the weird hour of the night when all the other doctors and nurses seemed to be elsewhere, but being in a child's mind, I obeyed. I sat in the little waiting room watching 3 girls go in before me, and each one out frantic and crying. When it came to my turn, I went in and sat on the doctor's table where 2 nurses stared forward as if dazed. The doctor explained to me he needed to make a list of all my unique beauty marks in case I tried to escape. When his hand began to reach into my underwear, I kicked, shoved, and ran out of the room back into my room, where I let hot, scalding water wash over me until the morning light began to creep out. Slowly after, a female psychiatrist came and asked me to join her. We went into a white room where she asked me what had happened the night before. I was so angry. I looked at her straight in the eyes and spoke softly, calmly, telling her exactly what I saw when I saw her, and the doctor and nurses who had orchestrated what had occurred the night before. Essentially, I became a mirror back to her everything I perceived about her and her involvement. When she broke down crying, I felt empowered, and using her own key, walked out of the room back into my own. Today, I am not proud of doing that, but at the time, I felt like I'd reclaimed part of my world. My parents, acting on intuition, insisted on taking me out of there despite the doctor asking me to stay. As I left, I met their eyes straight on, defiantly refusing to look away until they did. Not one doctor or nurse could keep my gaze. I knew I wasn't free of the terror I was headed back to at home with my mom, but I'd taken something new with me from that place. I'd taken back my courage, and I knew I didn't need to cause harm to myself to stand up for myself. Now, when Mom reached out to strike me, I refused to allow her to hurt me without raising my own arms, my hands stopping the books from hitting my head, my body refusing to be shoved headfirst into the walls. Nor did I ever strike out at her, as I saw acting like that as becoming what I perceived her to be. At first it infuriated her, but as I grew older, I grew stronger, and she could no longer attack me with the force I'd endured before. For years, I hung on to these terrible times, the hate palpable in my stomach, head, and heart. But my father had wisely noted that I needed guidance and began to expose me further to our family's history. My 18-year-old grandmother refusing to accept an arranged marriage to a 40-something general, her marriage to my grandfather in the midst of the Depression, and their fighting the Ku Klux Klan from the 20s through the 60s, putting their own lives at stake. In those teenage years, I was just focused on survival, trying to make it through my high school despite my mother pulling crazy things like switching out my car for hers and then calling the police to say I'd stolen it. Thankfully, that mistress knew what was up and covered for me when I switched the cars back, telling the police I'd been in class all day. But thanks to those who understood what was going on and to my beginning to learn about what bipolar manic depression really was, I slowly began to understand what my mother was fighting within her mind and body. At the time, I was desperate to shine in some way, somehow, any way to prove her I wasn't stupid, that the investment of love, time, money, and education my parents had put into me was worth it. I wanted them to know that I was determined to make something with my life. At the same time, I was struggling to juggle the insanity of her inner struggle with a teenager's typical rebellious nature, never knowing if she would be proud of me or tell me I was stupid and made her sick. When neurologists informed me that my seizures were due to my head having been thrust too many times into a wall, I felt so much anger to her, and once even walked clear across the city to avoid giving into acting on those emotions. But beside all of this, I had also been exposed on a trip to Cuernavaca to Xochicalco, an ancient Native American university that had been centuries ahead of its time, with hot and cold running water, pyramids that contained hollowed-out caves concentrating light so that broken bones could be diagnosed when the limb was held in the beam, producing X-ray images on the ground, and so much more. Each pyramid represented a different area of knowledge, one for the arts, one for sciences, one for health and medicine, etc. As I stood there, I felt something deeply familiar and an awareness that whatever pain or joy I might have experienced, it wasn't as important as what I would contribute to the world. And that fact was true for all of humanity. When I was a senior, my father tossed Thomas Friedman's book, The Lexus and the Olive Tree, on my bed and informed me that all high school students should read that, as it is the world you are going to grow up in. My father had treated me like a student, asking my 5-year-old self to hide in the corner of his office while he spoke with leaders of other companies, and then quizzing me afterwards, asking, who had something to offer they didn't put on the table? Who was lying? Who didn't tell the whole truth? Who was nervous about a specific thing? Who doesn't feel confident about themselves? How can you tell the difference between the two? At dinner parties, he taught me how to be his reconnaissance, finding out what specific people said or thought. Other times, he'd send me into one of his stores with a list of things to look at. Were they clean? How did they treat customers? Did they treat me differently due to my skin color? Did they have all the refrigerators working, etc.? I'd go in, buy a Slurpee, pay for my purchase, and walk back out, give Dad my report, and he'd go back in and let the manager know the CEO was concerned about A, B, and C. I asked him once, when he was teaching me how to shake hands and how to stand to dominate a room, why he decided to teach me these things. He told me, because when we got the wonderful news that we would get to adopt you, I went to the top floor of our building and looked out over the city. I decided in that moment that I'd raise you like a son and your femininity would take care of itself. Seconds later, he had turned as employees began arriving at that top floor, where a bar was open to everyone from the janitor to his VP, and anyone and everyone could expect to sit down and share a drink with the CEO to express ideas, frustrations, and more. I watched him handhold those individual franchise owners who were facing difficult times. I watched him listen to the company's fine arts curator who had once been the janitor until Dad had caught the man staring at the art in the hallways and recognizing potential had sent him to college. I watched him leverage his influence to fight for accessibility for education, against institutionalized bigotry, and for the environment and more. So I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise to me at all that when I first told him about my vision for creating a campus for humanity, aimed at helping humanity to handle the challenges of globalization in a responsible way, addressing the ecological and sociological challenges as much as the economic challenges, because I plainly saw from my own life experiences and through what he had exposed me to, that our world is going to be more and more entangled with each other, and therefore more interdependent environmentally and economically than ever before. I saw that only corporations seemed to be aware of globalization and how that situation would leave millions behind if they were empowered the way Dad had taken the time to work with individual store owners and university teachers. So when I explained to him that since Xochicalco had been built before modern technology and had offered education to Native American tribes from all over the Americas, gathering them for the sole purpose of exchanging knowledge, the way modern-day Olympics gathers athletes, those who traveled to the university bore a butterfly that led tribes along the way to house, feed, and clothe them, regardless of intertribal relations being negative or positive. When I pointed out that if half the world had achieved this before without our technological means, so why couldn't we do so today? Yes, I guess I really shouldn't have been surprised when he looked straight at me and said, "If it's important to you, you will do it before you're 30. Well, at 43 years old, I openly admit to not having made the full vision come true. But from it has sprung an international organization dedicated to helping humanity meet the challenges of globalization in a responsible way. From the local front in Dallas, Texas, to our chapters in Japan, Israel, Palestine, and Mexico, where we have cultural centers for the Tolteca and Maya people. Our walk has led us to negotiate the first treaty aligned in 300 years between the Hopi and Navajo tribes. Our Food Source DFW program has led us to feed upwards from 5,000 families a day in Dallas and has served as far as Puerto Rico to Atlanta, Georgia, and all over the USA. I learned to work with my hearing loss, swallowing my pride by giving up on the in-person classrooms and seeking out online education, and then working to create the School Out of a Box program aimed at bringing high school and university education to the most impoverished areas, starting with a prototype we had placed in the Mayan Cultural Center located in the Yucatan. Most recently, developer Mike Hogue has donated land for us for one of our first buildings, which will house the vital signs monitor based on the tireless work of Thomas Q. Johns, who has used AI to apply Dr. Don Edward Beck's use of spiral dynamics, which Dr. Beck used to work side by side with Nelson Mandela in orchestrating the overthrow of apartheid, to today's globalization challenges as categorized by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. I admit to being largely ignorant of the degree to which my family's history and the fight for human rights stretched back over centuries, having just recently learned that my grandmother's family, the Phillips, had operated an underground railroad to sneak slaves into Mexico during the Confederacy. Only in the past year did I learn from one of the incredible people I was blessed to protest the caging of children in McAllen, Texas with, Reverend Peter Johnson, who had organized the fight for desegregation in Texas, Louisiana, and other southern states for Martin Luther King Jr., that he had split a hamburger with my father in a whites-only establishment discussing how to increase economic opportunities for African Americans. And only a few years ago, I learned that the man in charge of our organizations, the Mimsy Institutes, Interfaith, Interracial, Intercultural Outreach, had been the grandson of the Grand Dragon KKK leader who had led the Ku Klux Klan to burn crosses in my grandparents' front yard. Nor did I know Dad had been the inside mole for activists fighting the University of Texas to require them to allow brown-skinned people to pursue graduate-level education. So it's with that knowledge and family legacy that I view the past 4 years. Under Trump's administration, the degree to which bigotry has risen has been deeply troubling. But I recall how while a person may not see all the seeds they planted bear fruit in their lifetime, their efforts do change the world. It's because so many challenges faced by those economically struggling have not been addressed that they were ripe for the picking when Trump offered them scapegoats based on race and encouraged centuries-old bigotries to rise. We see the same all around the world today, where when unaddressed, it is easy to blame the symptom as being simply one of hate. But due to my father's insightful training and what I learned from growing up with my mom, as I began to be able to perceive the illness beneath the actions, and from my own studies of organizational psychology, which does not seek to blame either the individual or society alone, but which advocates the belief it is a combination of factors that helps influence a mind, I've come to spend time trying to listen without assumptions to friends and associates all over the spectrum of demographics. The insights found there help me to understand that what is largely missing in the world is empathy. People think empathy means agreement, but it doesn't. It just means understanding the why and how of another's perspective, and harnessing empathy is the single most powerful thing that is too often overlooked in today's world. Empathy tells you what you need to know about the lay of the land. Empathy helps you diagnose the intentions, needs, frustrations, and challenges your opponent and teammate are feeling. You can turn a challenger into a collaborator with empathy. You can forge a negotiation where others said it would be impossible with empathy. We were able to get the most people to testify on behalf of the Liberian Truth and Reconciliation Commission simply by forging an environment with empathy, and use the same process for other endeavors as well, such as the Redstone Statement defining the difference between environmental philosophy and indigenous environmental philosophy, and in doing so not only gather indigenous scientists and leaders from all over the world, but also launch the first time different university departments as Southern Methodist University collaborated. From the Club of Budapest in Europe to working with Nexus at the United Nations to speaking at the request of the New Zealand government for a conference on humanitarianism, followed by connecting Maori leaders with a mosque that had been attacked, etc. It has been the overlooked, innovative applications of empathy and how it can forge the means for communities to progress that has been a core part of our work, and what I believe can empower any leader in any situation and profession. But most of all, I believe it can help to train the mind to become a leader, because there is no stronger voice than the one speaking up for what one truly believes. Empathy allows you to define that for yourself. These days, we still operate the Mimizing Institute, are moving closer to that vision for a campus for humanity, balancing the big picture with immediate needs, such as our Masks for Life initiative aimed at getting KN95 masks to Native American communities across the Americas, or our Green Source DFW program, unifying the environmental community from activists to innovators to investors to corporations, etc., while continuing our work via the Cultural Center's campuses, each of them a cultural-specific mini version of the Campus for Humanity. At the same time, I have expanded further and further into socially responsible investing via such endeavors as Women That Soar and Dakia, both which are using for-profit models to positively change lives, and most recently have launched UTF Holdings with my friend Kalu Ngwarmo, aimed at supporting investments based on a people, planet, profit model, supporting the Sustainable Development Goals as well. I may not have achieved my goals by 30, but 2 years ago, when I received the Civic Pioneer Award at the United Nations and was recognized for it by the USA Senate Congress and the Congressional Record, my mother came to witness the moment. By then, she had developed the beginnings of Alzheimer's, but despite forgetfulness, she has never forgotten that day. And nor have I, when she pulled me close to her and said, "You make me so proud, Marianne, and obviously I'm not the only one, as they know you're plenty smart too." It's silly, isn't it? How a 43-year-old woman there would still be a young girl inside me that felt the healing moment of those words. And it's insightful, isn't it, that it came after I had let go of trying to win her approval. So it is in that mentality that when asked to be a keynote speaker for the Women's March in Dallas, I reeled my mom all the way and watched her hold her fist high alongside all the others as I called the over 3,000 women and men in attendance to stand for the world they wanted to create. Part of me was scared to stand on that stage, because here in the Bible Belt, Papers, Please laws encouraged by the Trump administration meant never leaving the house without a passport, lest a policeman ask for proof of citizenship. And if you didn't have it, you would be sent to the border camps where people's medicine was confiscated, children were torn from parents and spouses from each other, and where women were denied sanitary items for the time of the month and then put into solitary for bleeding on themselves. The horror I witnessed when we protested in order to hold up a bus so press could capture proof of the atrocity via photos of children in cages was worse than when I walked on bones in Rwanda or in the mosque in New Zealand, because the horror was happening in front of our faces. I didn't blame the young teenage and 20-something soldiers charged with holding their guns at us and around the bus with the caged children, because they had signed up thinking they were volunteering to go to Afghanistan, not for aiming guns at children. Having been through real mental abuse, I am not exaggerating when I say I suspect a great deal of my country will be dealing with some form of PTSD for some time. Heck, my husband Joshua recently said I look the youngest I have in 5 years, and he chalks it up to the stress of seeing our democracy be truly threatened. I'd have to agree. But because I have my family's legacy of fighting on the right side of history, and because I have my own journey, I know that these moments, while dark, can give birth to remarkable possibilities, and am excited about the potential for redirecting the mentality of our admittedly young nation. Already, universities, corporations, and political leaders and more are requesting input using words we did not hear greatly before, phrases like fighting bigotry and intolerance, accepting responsibility for the environment, etc., have become more common from institutions who never bothered before. And I find myself being approached by those from all over the political, economic, racial, interfaith, and cultural spectrum. This tells me there is a very real potential to make progress, and the seeds we planted long ago are beginning to bear fruit, which lets me know in turn that it is time not just to harvest, but to plant more. For we too often measure success by that which we witness to in our own lives, when the real measure of success is often what remains standing after we are gone. This is why I see myself these days as intentionally creating the foundations and tools for future generations to continue helping humanity to evolve. I'm not talking about educating children, although that is important. I'm talking about setting institutions up for when those not even born yet can harness what we have created to make humanity that much further, becoming what I like to call conscious cultural creators of the world around themselves, capable of being fully conscious of how their choices, economical, environmental, and sociological, in turn, literally create the culture of our world. I have chosen to be completely transparent here, because when people read these anthologies, they so often focus on when a person is strong. But the truth is, strength comes not just from going through hell, but through intentionally deciding how we internalize it, thereby turning the heavy lifting it took to put one foot in front of the another, and to earn strength to push forward whole visions into reality into the world. The stubbornness it takes to remain undaunted in the worst of times comes from weathering still darker times, while knowing the soul's agenda is paramount over whatever the mind and heart might desire may sometimes seem frustrating. Hopefully my story has illustrated how shoving our ego aside allows room for us to recognize a much higher purpose for which all our attributes, talents, and opportunities are meant. And if you can grow to be in sync with that, the sky truly is the limit.